This is CJ Baker, and every day I've been listening to a randomly generated album that appears in the book, 1001 Albums You Must Hear Before You Die. And I just finished my 7th week. So, just like I did in previous weeks, this is my recap video. So, I'm basically posting clips that I previously posted, but these clips were posted as 3 minute shorts. So because some of the content needs to be edited, there will be some extended bonus content in this video. And just like I've done in previous weeks, afterwards, I'll give my updated rankings and I'll give my general observations and I will answer the question, do these albums belong in the book 1001 Albums You Must Hear Before You Die? So if you want me to keep making these videos, please like and subscribe and please enjoy. Today's randomly generated album is Dig Your Own Hole by the UK electronica duo The Chemical Brothers, released in 1997. So the time that it came out, I was starting to get into electronica music. And part of the reason was a lot of the alternative rock that I was listening to was just starting to become a bit stale and generic. And also the alternative rock station in Toronto, 102.1 The Edge, was starting to play a decent amount of electronica as well. They would play acts like the Chemical Brothers, Prodigy, Moby. They play that song Born Slippy by Underworld. But yeah, we'll get into this album. It has really strong bookends. It has block rocking beats that tune still brings back fond nostalgic memories. And then it closes strong with the private psychedelic wheel, which is over 9 minutes long, which for me, I'm not always a big fan of long songs. But in this case, it works. It's an epic tune, and it's just really trippy. So yeah, other highlights on the album, we got Setting Sun, which is also really trippy, and it features vocals of Noel Gallagher from Oasis. I also love the song Where Do I Begin, which features pretty vocals from Beth Orton. So I'd say the only downside to the album, it is a bit on the long side, which was a common issue in the 90s during the CD era anyways. And then it's also, the album could get a bit repetitive, which is also a common issue with electronica. And I think it does need to be acknowledged that some of that repetitiveness, I think, was intentional. Like, for example, the repetitive beats isn't necessarily a big deal when you're on the dance floor. And I think it does need to be acknowledged that a lot of individuals that listen to this type of music and even making this type of music were under the influence of certain substances. That being said, you do not need to be on drugs to enjoy this music. I enjoy this music, and I swear I never did recreational drugs. Even though when I was younger, there were those, including my mom, that I was concerned that I might have been on drugs because my pupils used to be unusually dilated, which is just kind of a weird thing that happened, and I don't know why. Thankfully, it corrected itself, but I'm getting off topic here. But yeah, overall, still an enjoyable album, even if you're not on drugs. So yeah, I give it 4 stars. Back for another one of those black rockin' beats. Today's randomly generated album is The Suburbs by Arcade Fire, released in 2010. This is a concept album about living in the suburbs. I'm loosely paraphrasing, but the band made the statement it's not really a love letter or hate letter to the suburbs. It's just more a letter from the suburbs. So it's about growing up in the suburbs, which a couple of the band members they grow up in. And it is something I can kind of relate to because at different points in my life, I have lived in urban and rural areas, but a big bulk of my life has been in the suburbs. So I kind of know the pros and cons of that experience as well. Part of the objective of the sound of the album was to simulate the feeling of the suburban sprawl. So the music is very expansive. So a big part of that is the string arrangements, and the string arrangements were done by Owen Powlett, who's also worked with them frequently. And I actually am a fan of some of his solo stuff as well. So at times, because of that expansive sound, it does border on the brink of being too busy. But I think for the most part, they succeed. There's a number of really strong songs on the album, but my favorite song is Rococo, which I just love the dramatic build and tension of it. I also really enjoy Half Light 1 and Half Light 2. And on those songs, along with other songs, I enjoy the interplay between Rin Butler and Regine Sishanya. And if anything, I probably prefer Regine as a vocalist, but I like the contrast between the male and female vocals. And in the case of Rin Butler, I have some other issues with him as well. That's to say, there's been some unsavory allegations about him, but sometimes you have to separate the art from the artist. And another highlight on the album, which also is a good representation of that sprawling, expansive sound, is Sprawl 2, Mountains Beyond Mountains. It's appropriate that that's towards the end of the album. It's the second last track, like the final track is just a minute and a half outro version of the opening track, The Suburbs. That's one thing that I think the album does really well. Like it's well sequenced, so each song builds upon each other until you get to the natural climax. The only other minor criticism I have about the album is a bit on the long side. There's not much in the way of fill, so I'm not sure what you would cut from the album. Well, it's still a really strong album, and it's a very immersive listening experience. I give it 4.5 stars. Today's randomly generated album is The Lexicon of Love by ABC, released in 1982. So prior to listening to the album, I was familiar with two of the songs, Poison Ale and The Look of Love. And the best thing I can say about those tracks is I don't hate them. My favorite song on the album is Tears Are Not Enough. And on the track, the lead vocalist, Martin Fry, he does do a falsetto. And he does the falsetto on a few of the other tracks as well. And the other times he does it, it's kind of grating. But in this case, it works. And overall, I don't mind that song. I like the vibe of that too. I mentioned the vocals of Martin Fry. That's probably my biggest issue with the album. Like I already mentioned, the falsetto, but on other tracks has more of a crooning style delivery. But it's not like a cool, swaggy crooner. It's a bit more of a cheesy crooner. And then my other issue with the songs on the album, it just sounds extremely dated. So it's very much of that time period. Like if you've been watching a few of my reviews, seems like most of the albums that I've gotten so far from the 1980s, I've been a bit critical about them sounding dated. So just to get that out of the way, I don't necessarily have an issue with music from the 80s. There's plenty of classic songs and classic albums. And I don't even always have an issue with music that sounds dated. Like, for example, I love a song like Video Kills the Radio Star. What I mean when I say dated, I just mean something that specifically sounds like it came from a specific time period. And more than any era in music, that is something that you could apply to the 80s. And I think a lot of that has to do with synthesizers. And I don't have an issue with synthesizers. There's some cool things that have been accomplished with synthesizers, but also with synthesizers, like when they first came out and they became really popular, specifically in the 80s with like synth pop. A lot of those sounds were considered novel at the time and maybe even a bit futuristic and cutting edge. So it's kind of like video games when Atari came out and Nintendo NES. These were considered pretty cutting edge and groundbreaking. In the case of this particular album, it's dated not in a fun, nostalgic way. It's more dated in like a cheesy way, other than like the three songs that I don't hate. I just don't really connect to this album. So I'll give it 2.5 stars. Today's randomly generated album is Hot Shots 2, not to be confused with Hot Shots Part 2 by the Scottish indie tronica band, the Beta Band, released in 2000. So I was somewhat familiar with the band. Like, for example, they have a song I really like called Dry to Rain, which was also famously featured in the film High Fidelity.
I will now sell 5 copies of the 3 EPs by the Beta Band. Do it.
What is that?
The Beta Band.
It's good.
I know.
There's a couple of other songs I've heard by them that I didn't mind, but for whatever reason, I just never took the time to listen to an entire album by them until now. But we'll get right into it. The first song is Squares, which I was familiar with, and I do really like that song. It's followed by Al Sharp, which is probably my favorite song on the album. It has a really trippy vibe. It also has some quirky, trippy lyrics as well. Some reference to like Power Rangers in the sky. Doesn't necessarily make a whole lot of sense, but I kind of dig it anyways. Another highlight on the album is Quiet. I also really like the vibe of that song as well. And I would say this album is very much a vibe-oriented album, but I would say that's almost the strength and the weakness because the vibes do become, it's almost like too consistent. Like it becomes a bit one note and the songs kind of blend together. At least with myself, I find that the album, it's very easy to lose your focus and for your mind to start wandering. But that being said, there's nothing on the album that I dislike. So overall, it's still a decent album. So I'll give it 3.5 stars. So today's randomly generated album is Madman Across the Water by Elton John, released in 1971. So Elton John is an artist that I would say I'm on the fence about. He has recorded a number of classic songs, but he's also has released some things that, at least in my mind, are absolute garbage. And this actually album is representative of that as well. It opens with Tiny Dancer, so obviously absolute classic, iconic tune. And then the second song, another iconic classic, Leave On. And then the fourth track on the album is the title track, Madman Across the Water. So concerning Madman Across the Water, when it was released back in the 70s, there's people that thought that it was written about Richard Nixon. So when Bernie Taupin, who wrote the lyrics, was asked about that, he actually said it wasn't, but he thought the idea of it being written about Nixon was actually kind of genius. So he was totally okay with the lyrics being interpreted that way. So yeah, so Madman Across the Water, that's the fourth track. And those 3 songs I mentioned are by far the best 3 songs on the album. So this album is the epitome of top heavy. And then after that, it just completely drops off a cliff. Like the next song, the first song on side 2, Indian Sunset. Not a big fan. It's a bit proggy for me. And a few of the songs are a bit proggy. And if you've watched some of my other reviews, you know I'm not particularly a big fan of prog rock. So yeah, I'm not really a fan of the proggy elements. And there's a couple other songs I just don't like at all. Rotten Peaches, Rotten Tude, and all the nasties I just find cringe. And it's my least favorite song on the album. So the first half of the album, because in many ways this is a tale of 2 sides. So the first half of the album with the 3 classic songs, I would give 4.5 stars to. The second half of the album, I'll give like 1.5 stars to. So you divide that in half, it's about 3 stars, but I'll give an extra half star because of Tiny Dancer. So 3.5 stars. Hold me closer, Tiny Dancer. count the street lights by the highway. So today's randomly generated album is Fetch the Bolt Cutters by Fiona Apple, released in 2020. So far, this is the newest album I discussed, and basically the last revision was 2021, so there won't be too many albums much newer than this. But this album was released during the pandemic. Fiona Apple recorded this at home using GarageBand, so it is a very intimate lo-fi album. But in many ways, I think part of the reason why the album did resonate was because of the pandemic. With individuals being under quarantine, many people were feeling trapped within their circumstances. They were basically ready to get out those metaphorical bolt cutters and escape. And this is an album that I definitely personally connected with during the pandemic, and I did listen to it a fair bit. But yeah, we'll get into the album. One of the standout songs is Shamika. Shamika was a classmate of hers in middle school, and Fiona Apple was trying to fit in with the cool kids who snubbed her. So Shamika approached Fiona Apple, and she's like, okay, why do you want to sit with those kids? And then she made the statement, you got potential, which hence the line, Shamika said, I got potential. And there's even like a nice little story connection with this. After she released the album, decades later, after losing contact with Shamika, they reconnect, and Shamika happened to be a rapper, and Fiona Apple was featured on one of Shamika's songs called Shamika Says. So that's a bit of a cool story as well. The highlight for the album for me is Under the Table, and there's like a catchy chorus, kick me under the table all you want. I won't shut up. I won't shut up. But basically that song, it well articulates a fundamental message of the album about defiance and refusal to be silenced. And that song also has some of the best lyrics on the album. Like there's the line, I would beg to disagree, but begging disagrees with me. The album was very much rooted in real life scenarios. And because of that, it is a very honest album as well, very candid. At times, almost to the point of being uncomfortable. It's like you're reading her diary entries. Like, for example, she does talk about uncomfortable subjects such as sexual assault, but she also balances that out with moments of humor. It resonated partly because of the pandemic, but even going back and listening to it now, it's still an album that I connected with. Absolute 5-star album. Today's randomly generated album is the self-titled debut by Elvis Presley, released in 1956. And the album also features an iconic album cover, which actually inspired the cover of the Clash album, London Calling, as well. And of course, this is a significant album just on the basis of being the debut of the king of rock and roll, Elvis Presley, who ended up obviously being a very significant individual in the history of music. And the album has really strong bookends. It opens with Blue Suede Shoes, which is obviously one of Elvis Presley's more well-known tunes. It was a cover of Carl Perkins, who was a Sun Records label mate. And Perkins' version was a hit as well, but I probably do prefer Elvis's version because it is a bit more Waller-kid. And as far as bookends, Money Honey is a solid tune to close the album as well. Another highlight is this cover of Ray Charles' I Got a Woman, which I do prefer Ray Charles' version, but this is a solid Waller-kid version as well. The album is a bit hit and miss, and there's some definite fill on it. Like, for example, there's a couple of almost, I would say, kind of like country-like ballads, which to me kind of fall flat and are a bit schmaltzy for my personal taste. There's also a couple of Little Richard's Tutti Frutti, and I like Little Richard and I like the original version, but Elvis's cover is absolutely horrendous. It's by far the worst song on the album. So yeah, the album overall is a little bit spotty and hit and miss, but it's still significant because it is the first album by Elvis. And Elvis is always one of those artists that I viewed as more of a singles artist anyways. And this album doesn't really change my mind. That being said, I actually do enjoy his 1969 in Memphis album. But yeah, for Elvis, you generally don't think of albums, you think of songs. But yeah, overall, hit and miss album. We'll give it 3.5 stars. So this concludes our recap. And overall, not a bad week. There was a new 5-star album, and there was only one album below 3 stars. But now let's look at the updated rankings. So there are too many changes, but there's a few here. So we mentioned the one new 5-star album, Fetch the Bolt Cutters by Fiona Apple, which now has the 8th spot. If we scroll down a bit, we can see the other albums like Arcade Fire was from this week. So that's now the 13th spot. Chemical Brothers was from this week, which is now 25. Then we got a few new 3.5-star albums. So we got the Beta Band, Elvis Presley, and Elton John, and then ABC has the second to last spot, and King Crimson is still my least favorite album. So, of course, that's the updated rankings. But the question we ask every week, do these albums deserve to be in the book? 1,001 albums you must hear before you die. As I say every week, that's obviously hyperbole because you can live a perfectly happy life and not listen to any of these albums. Or maybe not, maybe you're just a miserable SOB, I don't know you. But essentially the question is, are these essential albums? It is the only album I'll probably question this week is ABC. Not just because I didn't particularly like the album, because those albums I don't like, but I can acknowledge that they belong in the book. But I also don't really see it being an influential album. And I also might question the Beta Band. I mean, I did enjoy the album. I just don't know how influential that album is. But I think it's one of those albums that is affected because of the fact that the book is published in the UK, so there's a bit of a UK bias. So, for example, if the book was published in Canada, you'd probably have a couple of Tragically Hip albums, which I definitely wouldn't have a problem with. So, yeah, what did you think of my reviews this week? Did you agree? Disagree? Do you think I'm an idiot? Let me know in the comments. Please do so respectfully. And you can also let me know what you think of my overall rankings as well. And if you want me to keep making videos like this, please like and subscribe. And as I mentioned, every day I review a different randomly generated album. So you can also check out all those reviews like a playlist that I have curated as well. And you can also check out my website, Ongoing History of ProtestSongs.com. And one last thing I want to mention before I conclude, I use Riverside to record and edit it and publish my videos. So for example, prior to using Riverside, sometimes it would take me hours to upload a video on YouTube. Now it takes a matter of seconds. So it's really streamlined the process. If it's something that you do want to check out, I'll leave a link in the description. And it's something that you can even try out for free. So thanks for watching, and please stay safe.